One more time. I want a fresh take, fresh take. Welcome to Lost Keys to Embodying Your Potential. I'm beyond inspired to be sharing with you the most potent and distilled keys and tools that I have personally utilized to help hundreds of people break through blocks. And what I like to say is turn your dead ends into doorways. Isn't that a good way of looking at what these contextual keys do? And really, they have this power. Within all of us, there is this inherent call towards more. And this is important to recognize, whether it's we want to be more physically fit, or we want to be more financially successful, or we're looking for relationships or more spiritual development. There is this innate force that draws us towards a better version of ourselves. And we're going to be defining that as our potential. And these keys are ways of looking at our body through 3 different archetypical lenses in order to tap in and remove the blocks that are stopping you from bringing forth that fullest potential. The past is full of many masters who have mapped the way and left behind clues. This path can be relied on, but only you can walk it. Our potential, as always, as we know, lies just on the other side of making a habit of stepping in the right direction. Sometimes we don't know what the right direction is, but we're going to get into it. And before we do, I want to just take a quick second to introduce myself. So, slide number 2, I go by Mateo Flows, and I teach people how to embody their potential. For the last 12 years, I've been studying, exploring, and most importantly, this is central, practicing the secrets of bringing forth our best self through the body, which, there's a lot of coaches out there helping people optimize in a lot of ways. This is how I distinguish. My path is through the body primarily, and through all the emerging layers that come from it secondarily. So we look at it holistically, but we prioritize the body. And I think that alone is a major stepping stone in the right direction. So I began my journey teaching as a yoga instructor. That was like my first taste of the magic. And as soon as I was teaching yoga, I was also leading breath work, workshops, transformational retreats. And for years, these 2 passions were kind of divided into 2 camps. There was like my movement passion and my transformation passion. But over the last, 4 or 5 years of educating myself deeper into these 2 fields through, extensive investment, certification. Look, I got a cool little picture here. You can see some of my certifications. This is, just a few of them. I have over 16 different fitness and wellness modalities that I've been educated in, which really help to expand my capacity of understanding. It's one thing to look at something through one lens, but when you start to have multiple lenses of interpretation, you start to create novel connections. And that's a lot of where the value I'm sharing with you guys comes from today. So as I explore these different modalities, it became clear to me that these 2 worlds of movement and transformation had a very important juncture, which is the body. Because here's the problem, guys, and I've experienced this in the world of transformation, whether it's plant medicine ceremonies or traditional therapeutic practices, there's a huge gap in the bridge to actualizing our potential, and then the degree to which people are capable of actually embodying that transformation that they are experiencing. The fail point is time under tension. And we're going to explore a little deeper what that means. But this became central to my philosophy. It's like our ability to embody what we know, what we see clearly, to walk and take action forward is where most people fail. And I love this quote. This is actually an original one of mine. With repeated action, our patterns of attention strengthen associated neural pathways. And this is how our new habits form. The movement of these habits enacted over time is what adapts our body. And then this is how our being becomes embodied. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, you can go ahead and ask any questions you want in the chat. We'll be going a little deeper into this and explaining more. And pretty much a lot of this is going to be breaking down the deep contextual underlying behind that simple statement there. Because clarity, no matter how impactful I've always seen it occur as a fleeting thing. However, there are methods and practices that can help make it last. And I'm beyond grateful to be sharing these keys that I find so life-changing with you guys today. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. How does this work, okay? So we're going to be going through 5 essential sections. And one of the key terms that I'm going to try to emphasize is this is useful because. And this is a mantra that I've adopted as going through and funneling all this information to ensure that what you receive is fluff-free and aimed towards actionability. So we could talk very deeply about all this stuff, but I'm going to slice through it to the points that matter most. Section 1, why you don't do what you know you should. And this is, something we'll get into in just a second, but it comes down to understanding our foundational forces that form us in the landmarks, the archetypical landmarks that awareness can land on, the 3 foundational repeating archetypical landmarks. And then we'll explore a little bit more. What is this most powerful resource in the universe? How can we leverage it better? What am I even talking about when I say that? And from there, we'll get into the life-changing body codes that really, cause leverage and change in the way that you hold yourself and move your physical vessel through space. And then we'll explore how the energetic uprising of that physical body can be channeled more efficiently in the direction of your truest, purest intention. And lastly, we'll be exploring what are the methods of mastering the mind that come into play when we are trying to form a narrative around this physical, energetic experience that we're living through. So with no further ado, my friends, let's go ahead and get right on into it. So why don't you do what you know you should? And this is why I broke it down into these 3 sections, because although this can be a complex question, this is the simplest way we can go over it. These are the 3 basic building blocks of possibility. Any limitation we face, any problem that may be occurring, can be categorized into one of these 3 landmarks. Either 1, your body is physically limiting your capacity. 2, you lack the energy and emotional management necessary. Or 3, your mind can't figure out the solution. So no matter what problem, it's one of those 3 things. And this is why I find this map so useful. So let's talk a little bit more about this map that I'm using. A meta map of being, and this is a very simple graphic for it, right? It's like our body emerges and uprises into our energetic emotional experience, which then gets overlaid with the story of our mind. And it's a 2-way street, but it always mediated through our energy. So this is useful because through understanding these key layers of experience, we construct a clear definition of map that we can start to work with. And this emphasizes prioritizing the body in terms of order of uprising, because everything is felt primarily as physical sensational phenomenon and then emerges as an energetic, emotional, more subtle end of that spectrum, which then finally becomes a story in our mind that then loops back into the way that we feel, that then affects the way that our body is held and transfers tension and stress through our being. So it is, and this is why the body cannot be underemphasized, right? Because it is evolutionarily and developmentally true that sensory awareness comes before our cognitive awareness. That's why it's foundational, and it's also undeniably the primary base level, because physicality ties into objectivity. So essentially, faster is faster. It doesn't matter what you think about it. Stronger is stronger, right? Pain is undeniable. You can't philosophize your way out of feeling pain. And this is why I love martial arts so much. It's not a debate. You have the reality. You either tap or you didn't. You either won or you lost. The cognitive realm is much more objective, right? It's much more open to interpretation. So by being closer to let me rephrase that. The cognitive realm is more subjective, where the body is more objective. So being closer to the objective end of our spectrum of experience is one of the reasons that it's more foundational, right? You can't debate it. Let me just take a sip of my smoothie. I hope you guys I hope this is making sense so far. If anybody has any particular questions, feel free to ask. So then we got to go a little deeper into, okay, how do we come to being from here? And there are some foundational forces that affect and form us, so we can start to look at the factors that go into creating who we are. And in one sort of sense, all of the limitations that we face can be attributed to a mismanagement of stress towards the desired outcome over time. So we're not properly moving the force of stress. And stress we commonly think of in terms of psychological stress, but stress is also a physical factor. For example, we look at gravity. Gravity is a physical stress. And the limitations that result from the forces of physical stress, psychological stress, and genetic disposition, we can define as a sort of strain. And what it does is it triggers a required response of attention or action. But oftentimes it's in that interpretation of what response is being asked for in the way that these different forces conflict and converge where the mismanagement occurs. I'll give you an example. You have gravity affecting your body. It's telling you need to move in a certain way, but you can't because it's too cold. So you're shivering up. That's an example of two physical forces working in opposition to make that stress being mismanaged, right? Or let's say, hey, I really want to, my gravity is telling me that I need to go run, but I haven't eaten anything yet today. There's a conflict between these two forces, resource scarcity and gravity. And then on the more subtle end of our physical stress is the electromagnetic interactions, and is obviously our genetics, which is something that we won't really be touching on because I'm really focused on things that are actionable and can be used, and our genetics are not something that we can necessarily affect, right? So talking about these primordial sort of modeling inputs that came into place even before we were humans, before we had this cognitive world that we lived in, gravity was the main force of external physical stress as well as resource scarcity, right? Animals are competing for these limited resources. And this is what drives bodily action, which forms the technical structure of our being. This is evolution. When Darwin says survival of the fittest, it's how does this physical structure compete for these limited resources and interact with gravity and as well temperature and electromagnetic spectrum, but those are on the much more subtle side of things. And I won't say temperature's on the more subtle side, but it's on the more less face side, because if you are out of that range of temperature variation, it's like you adapt to live in it or you don't. It's not something that we face as often. Anyway, let's move on to psychological stress, okay? Which is another formative force. And this is the body's reaction to situations that the mind perceives as potentially harmful. So we have this subjective cognitive lens of experience that we go through. So when we're experiencing psychological stress, that's what that is. It's this reaction to something that we think could potentially hurt us. And this response creates a physical reaction. Our heart rate increases, our breath quickens or shortens, muscles tighten, blood pressure rises. The psychological stress manifests as resistance to optimal action. So you can see how these forces of psychological and physical stress might contradict, right? Like, for example, you want to go stretch your body because gravity's asking you to move that force through, but you're in a conflict with your partner, so you just stay focused and engaged in that psychological connection that you're having, so you ignore the voice of that force trying to move that stress in the particular direction. And the interesting thing is, if we can learn to listen to these three layers, we can better follow our intuition on how we need to distribute this stress optimally. Okay, so our psychological stress manifests as this resistance to optimal action. This tendency to stimulate psychological stress through our mind's thoughts is something that makes us unique, right? It's what distinguishes humans from a lot of animals. It's our most powerful tool and, our biggest curse at the same time. And this is what this story of Adam and Eve is all about, if you haven't noticed, right? And not only are we aware of ourselves, but we are aware of other individuals being separate from our awareness, and then further aware of their awareness of us. And this is where culture starts to come into play, and this is like another one of our main psychological stresses. Culture is such a powerful formative pressure, but we're so in it that we oftentimes don't even recognize the degree to which it forms us. More and more, we're starting to become aware of how, the way that we pressured ourselves when we were young really negatively distributed the stresses we developed to hold ourselves in certain ways that were inhibitory, right? This is becoming more commonly understood, but the degree to which this is actually affecting us is so much deeper than we recognize. Like, your whole concept of everything comes from what your culture teaches you, right? And there are some things that are closer to the objective physical layer, and there are things that are further away in the subjective cognitive realm. And you can usually see the things that are closer to the objective because they cross across cultures, right? They are more inherent to our foundational being, right? So from the time we're young, we're taught from our culture, and we experience its lessons, and we develop these skills that we need to survive and succeed within interpersonal relationships, our awareness of other people being aware of us. And our brain starts to adapt, right? Especially at these developmental milestones, like our first 2 decades, we're really pruning the neural pathways of our brain to optimize towards reward and away from pain, So stress is the mechanism that shapes us, and stress occurs in all these different ways. So this is where the limitations start to form for why we don't do what we know we should. Okay? Yeah. So these limits show up in the body sometimes, and when these limits appear in the body, it's primarily in the form of changes in posture and movement. So when we react to stress and stagnation or less than optimal gravitational orientation as opposed to fluid expression through motion, it causes the formation of contraction within our fascial structure that restricts that expression of stress, eventually might cause pain, and then inhibits your energetic signaling. Your body is constantly sending you information. It comes in the form of sensations, and those sensations hold the key to unlocking these limited patterns within you, right? But you need to be able to interpret that stress in order to get the desired outcome. And this unfolds organically once your internal resources are engaged in a safe, supported manner. Once you feel like you are safe to start to feel, then you can go deeper into what that feeling is asking for. And this leads to expansion and renewed life force that makes lasting happiness possible and a more likely outcome, right? Understanding your body's sensations will transform your life. Foundation. So we start there, right? And limitations in our emotional and energetic level of experience center around our body's chemical response and electrical signaling that react with the physical and psychological stressors. So physical structures react up through the body as energetic signaling, and psychological stressors react down through the mind as emotional stress. And the electromagnetic interaction of both form our alertness and our mood. So it's like, how awake are you? How focused are you? How do you feel? Are you happy? Are you sad? This is that interaction between the story our mind is casting and our physical felt experience. So, we can control our alertness by shifting our body's condition, and we can alter our mood by changing our mindset. So if you want to affect, how awake you are, you could do some breath work, you could go for a run, you could cold plunge, you could drink some coffee. That will affect your energetic awareness. If you want to change your mood, you change the story in your head. So understanding this directionality gives you a lot of leverageable control and power on how to change things. And The essence of limitations in energy and emotion, the root is suppression. This suppression forms when our external environment limits our capacity to process and express this energetic emotional charge. So just like, we might be limited in our physical movement, if we don't let ourselves feel, there is a stagnation, and that accumulated suppressed emotional stress feeds back into physical tension, which begins to form these contracted layers that accumulate over time. And then these trapped emotions appear in the mind as limiting patterns of thought. So, you've heard of limiting thought patterns before, like, I just can't do it because, it's this story that we tell ourselves that comes from this suppressed energetic emotional place. And the last limitation is the mind, right? Our mind are limited in the perception, our minds are limited in perception by our degree of self-awareness, right? So we might not even be aware of the story that our mind is telling us. That's step one, right? Just to recognize the narrative going on in your mind. We have 3 layers of awareness. We have this filter that sorts through everything that we are experiencing and helps us decide where our attention goes. And that capacity to direct awareness and the degree to which we are caught in these disempowering loops and patterns of cognition are the fail points for how we can use our mind to better serve us, right? So these are where all these limitations come from. They're in the body, they're in the energy, they're in the mind. Any problem you have can fit into those 3 categories. Understand, and honestly, it fits into all 3 of these categories because all of them are truly one thing. That understanding is extremely key and crucial. But understanding this one thing from these different perspectives helps us to see something new, right? So the keys to understand, embodiment is actually, it's your baseline state. Disembodiment is something that requires effort, and it actually pulls energy away from us. And when we have these experiences in our lives that overwhelm us and cause us pain, your body is trying to protect you when it takes those experiences and suppresses them into the physical tissues, because you're not ready to face them in that moment. So understand that these limitations are actually a protection mechanism. And one important method, or why this is useful because if you understand that the suppression from your body, your energy, and your mind came from a place of trying to keep you safe, you can have a lot more grace in relationship to these parts of ourselves. You can thank them for what they did to try to help you, and you can let them know that you are now safe to proceed. And it's in this relationship to these different parts of ourselves that we find the key to start to unlock these blocks. Reconnect to our fullness. And that reconnection, it's a practice of unlearning. It's unlearning our adaptive numbness, right? So again, our fully connected, fully invigorated state, that is the actual baseline. We're just trying to return back to it. And this path is mostly one of building skills and the courage to surrender when these intense sensations come, and realizing that you won't die if you let yourself feel them. You're safe to feel. Simple stuff, right? We got to say a bunch of words around it, but I value the context. It helps me to unlock the deeper layers within myself. I hope this is serving you as well. Let's talk about the most valuable resource in the world, right? And this is obviously attention, our awareness. This is the building block of everything that is. With enough, and I love this quote. This is a quote I've held for years because it's true. And if you remember this, it brings a burden of self-responsibility that I find incredibly empowering. With properly moderated attention, anything that's possible can be achieved. Say that one more time. With properly moderated attention, anything that's possible can be achieved. So if it's possible, and if you moderate your attention in the right way, you can achieve it. I know I had to say it 3 times, but it's such a powerful statement, right? So why these 3 layers? Why these 3 lenses? It's because these 3 layers and 3 lenses are archetypical, essential landmarks from which our awareness can go to. We can either be more aware of our physical felt sense, or we can be more aware of the subtle emotional energetic uprising of that, or we can be more aware of the story in our head. Those are the only three places that our awareness can ever go. So when our attention is in the body, it's a sensory experience. We receive this flow of information through our internal and external proprioception. And our proprioception is the word that defines this felt physical sense. So not only can we see our body and touch it, but we also have internal mechanoreceptors that convey information about where we are positioned in gravity. It balances our body, right? Unlike our external proprioception, this inner sensory flow, it never stops. We can't turn this off. We can go into an isolation chamber and take away the external sense, but we're always going to feel this internal flow of information. It's important and it's constantly available whether we want it or not, right? Whether we pay attention to it or not. You can completely disassociate from your body. It's still going to be there screaming to be moved and stretched. So in that respect, our bodies qualify as the object that we know best in the universe. And still, despite that, we tend to be very limited in our awareness of ourselves. Isn't that kind of interesting? So when we direct awareness towards the body, we focus on sensory information, obviously sight, what we see, sound, smell, taste, touch, and our internal proprioception. When we focus our awareness on our energetic emotional layer, it's more the sensory neurons communicating electrically through the nervous system to specific neural networks in the brain. So our brain provides the response through biochemical reaction that then releases certain chemical signalings, and then these chemical reactions create a magnetic charge. It's the interaction of these electrical signalings and the magnetic charge from the chemical response that form our electromagnetic field, and it's the motion of this field that is our felt energetic emotional sense. And this really comes into focus when we start to bring awareness to the emotional texture of our physical sensations. When we pay attention to the subtle edges, right? When we are aware of our awareness as a mood or spectrum of alertness, this layer of experience is more subtle, right? It's more vibrational. It's less hard and it's more in the waves. It flows, it ebbs more, it's less solid. It's a progressive signaling of physical stimulus that influences our decision making, our thought process, our memories, and our present experiences. So your ability to understand and deal effectively with your emotional energy is another just quintessential key to being vital in seeking your fullest happiness. This is how we unlock our potential. So unlike the body's physical layer of our being, we discover our emotional layer through our internal feedback. It's a first person experience. We can't look at someone, although we might be able to judge from their body, we can't actually see their emotional felt sense. It's a frequency, it's a field, right? Even when our body is still, our emotions and energies are constantly flowing like a wave, and it's what mediates between the physical and the psychological. The psychological gets placed on top of the energetic emotional. The psychological doesn't actually have direct access to the felt sense. It interprets it through the uprising of this emotional energetic point of awareness. And advanced practitioners can really find this layer and sink deeper into it. It comes before anatomical understanding, right? We have the technology to look at the body very deeply. We can see the cells, as we cut and dissect and understand, but we don't really have the technology to really fully map our energetic and emotional self. But people who practice tuning into that layer can go very deep. And with all things, again, if we focus on this layer of experience, the pathways will start to form and we will strengthen that connection. It's important to know this is useful because our emotional energy is a neutral force, and we might not always feel it that way, right? Our cognitive interpretations about the emotional energy are what give it its meaning. So this is what makes our emotions either a positive or negative emotion, right? Whether we view emotion as positive or negative, all depends on the anticipated outcome of the actions around that emotion. For example, anxiety and excitement are the exact same felt sense. You ever recognize that before? The only difference is when you think you're going to succeed, you get excited. And when you're scared you might not, you get anxious. Same energetic uprising, right? So what you label as anger, sadness, fear, or joy, those are just carrier waves on the entire spectrum of feeling. And understanding that emotions are energetic is what implies that they're fluid, moving resources meant to be felt and released as opposed to suppressed and ignored. So that's the big key. Emotions are meant to be felt and released, not suppressed and ignored, so that the flow of that energetic spectrum can continue. And then when our awareness is in our thoughts, right, it's directed towards our level of inner speech or visual imagery internally, right? This narrative process and the visual contents that are represented in our minds more often than we realize are central to our awareness. Even when we're not paying attention to the process, we're usually thinking on top of everything that we experience. So the keys that are important to remember from this: the body comes first, because we need to prioritize our physical state before our emotional or psychological, and where we put our attention is the only leverageable resource that we have to affect this. So let's get into these life-changing codes and start learning how we can actually create this impact. First thing to know, the primary function of our body is to move. Now, while modern humans have leveraged the technological fruits of our cognitive process to make our survival less dependent on our physical output, our bodies still evolved to need to walk for miles and hunt and forage and find shelter. It's only over the last 100 to 200 years that our modern society has developed to no longer necessitate physicality. So this sedentary lifestyle is obviously like a huge problem. It's a relatively new phenomenon for us as a species, and physical activity has become something we need to actively make time for rather than just a requirement for survival. A sedentary lifestyle, it negatively affects every aspect of our being, and it's one of the biggest hurdles that we must overcome in our modern world to embody our potential. If you want to think clearer, feel better, have more energy, and expand your body's capacity, you need to move more. Simple as that, right? So this is kind of just a little backstory on how did we get to this place, right? Modern fitness, which is like kind of what we consider the common solution to the problem of our modern society's sedentary disposition, looks a lot like going to a gym and working out. But oftentimes we don't recognize, because we are so submerged in that culture, that this idea that we have of fitness has only became popularized in the 1960s, guys. Like, this is a new thing, working out. Before then, our physical demands were oriented around practical application. You know, to survive, we had to run, throw, balance, jump, crawl, walk, carry, catch, fight. You know, and it wasn't until, and that was, you know, hundreds of thousands of years of our evolution, and it wasn't until between 10,000 and 8,000 BC that we had this agricultural revolution, which transitioned us from this nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle into farmers. So our body is still very much based in that pre-agricultural state. When we became more agricultural, much of our movement necessities they switched. So like it was less dramatic than our current sedentary lifestyle. We were still moving, but the demands of growing food and raising cattle, it meant a lot of chores and a lot of daily labor on the farm. But these tasks are more repetitive and require a more limited range of motion than, you know, previously more varied, complex moving, right? Like, for example, climbing up a tree versus climbing up a ladder. They're very different stimuluses. And this evolution started to progress us in a direction of moving in much more simpler ways. And then, around 4000 BC, civilizations were rising and falling, and our physicality's main purpose was for war, for battle. So we started to develop in a sort of military direction, right? We were still focused on walking, running, throwing on uneven terrain, but it was more like arming ourselves with weapons and learning how to defend ourselves. So I think that there's something very important about practicing martial movement. I like to swing swords and maces because it connects to this period of our time when that was the primary thing that we moved for combat, for survival. That is ancestral. It is a big part of why we evolved the way we evolved, because only the people who were good at fighting survived. Duh, right? And yeah, although it was closer to what our ancestors did, once this physical combat aspect started to die down and we got more comfortable, we kind of lost purpose of why it is we move. Even with this modern resurgence of fitness, the focus has shifted more to looking fit than the application of movement for survival. So this is a big part of the problem, and I can present a lot of solutions. So some of the things we can think about is that modern day fitness, and let me just take a sip of my smoothie real quick before I drop these bombs on you. Modern day fitness is usually divided into isolated modalities, whether it's lifting, jogging, yoga, CrossFit, boxing, dancing. People tend to specialize in the modality they practice. And this tendency towards specialization in a particular direction, it adapts our body in a way that has benefits towards that speciality, but also comes at a high cost. Our bodies adapt to the demands that we impose on them. So by moving primarily in these isolated modalities, we limit our movement towards a specific goal. And that's something that we want, but it's further away than the more diverse evolutionary movement requirements that our ancestors relied upon to survive. And this is a great example. For example, if you do pull-ups, you become adapted to getting better at pull-ups, which makes you, obviously better at pull-ups. But you're not necessarily adapting to other climbing patterns. So in short, pulling up is climbing, but climbing is not pulling up. Think about that one for a second. It's this tendency towards specialization. It's yielded so much benefit to us as a collective. But when it comes to our movement, I think the detriment is often outweighed. Like, we need brain surgeons. We need plumbers. We need people who specialize in specific fields. But when it comes to the way we move, it tends to degenerate our health. So I'm a big proponent of varied movement practices. Find more than one modality, spread it around, generalize, because that's one key that can help you get closer to the way that your body is designed to be. Our joints need to move through a wider range of motion. Simple as that. Whatever practice you're doing, it needs to not be the limitation of how your joints move, because our joints require nutrients in order to stay vital and for longevity over time. And the only way to get nutrients into our joint capsule is through moving through the full range. So when you limit the range, you stop feeding certain parts of your joint, and that's what degenerates them over time. And this is why when people age, they tend to complain their joints hurt, right? That is not a necessity. It's a result of our lifestyle, right? And just not having proper understanding. So by moving through specific patterns, we also often build up excessive tension in the areas of our body that are associated with those movements, which over time can lead to imbalances and compensations and potentially injuries and pain. Yeah, so a lot more I could say with that. Here's the solution I'll give. How do we move? At any point in your life, there's no one right answer to this question. Because as you're reading this, your body is a unique thing. But one aspect that makes humans unique is how diverse and generalized our movement potential is. We don't swim as well as fish, but we can swim. We don't run as fast as cheetahs, but we can run. We don't climb as well as monkeys, but we can climb. So Although only your proprioceptive intuition properly understood can ever tell you the right way to move, whether you're aware or not of it, in every moment it is signaling you this information, and you don't often have the context to properly understand it, and the lens through which your mind contextualizes it is often limited by experience, practice, and understanding. Even though all of that, listening to the body and following it is the path to knowing how you should move. I'll give you an example, right? I started as a yoga instructor. Yoga was my first map of bodily awareness, the first way that I started to relate to this physical self. It provided a language of interpretation, and that's what asanas are. They are I think of them as a language. So it's like I feel X in my body, that means I do Y asana in response. But that specialization limited my ability to interpret. I felt everything through that lens. So it's like when you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But as my practices evolved and as I was exposed to all these different modalities, I started to interpret those same signals in a different way. So, I would feel the same thing, but instead of an asana, maybe I would move my shoulder through a specific range of motion, or maybe I would apply tension in this particular direction, or release the fascia through some self-myofascial release. And, as your practice continues to evolve, if you're lucky, you have multiple lenses that you can start to layer on top of each other. And this is, again, how you get these novel connections that really create these powerful breakthroughs in change. So learn more different ways of moving and apply them to each other. This is one of the reasons that I want to talk about this so much, because once you start to connect to this proprioceptive sense a little deeper, it reveals otherwise hidden realms of self-awareness that can bring you deeper into yourself and then provide solutions to previously unsolvable pains. And that is one of the big aims of the book that I'm writing, which is, you guys are getting the annotated version of it. So, move more, diversify your movement, move closer to the way that our ancestors lived, and begin to follow your proprioceptive felt sense. And these are some of the ways that you can start to change your body so that it best optimizes. And I'm going to talk a lot more about this in the future. This is the next slide. Okay, so now we talk about posture. And posture is the result of how we move. It's the way that we hold ourselves in relationship to gravity after a lifetime of movement, stimulus, and stress distribution. Functional patterns is a really powerful modality that talks about this sort of concept a lot. And Nadia Aguilar, its founder, wrote this great book called The Power of Posture. And he describes the importance of posture by explaining the way our structural alignment interacts with these foundational stressors, right? So this interaction shows us how the tension we hold within our body as a structure can become the most leverageable variable that physically affects your confidence, your self-esteem, your awareness, your alertness, and your personal development. All of that comes from the way that we passively hold ourselves. My battery might die on my camera, so I might pause for a second here, guys. Let's just say this. People who sit up straight with good posture have a lot more confidence, a lot more energy, and a lot more awareness than people who don't. People who have low self-esteem often tend to slouch, shoulders roll forward inward to protect themselves, and you tend to not be as alert when you do that. So those who practice good postures tend to be more aware of their surroundings, and in general, more involved in what's going on, so they have a deeper sense of belonging. Isn't that just mind-blowing, how your posture can lead to a deeper sense of belonging? And it obviously, well, maybe not so obviously to some people, has a heavy effect on our hormones, our energy levels, our libido, our circulation, our digestion even, and our breathing capacity, all of which affect everything. So if your muscles and bones are out of optimal alignment, they may impinge upon essential nerves and arteries that facilitate movement and blood flow. By implementing good postural habits, the body can then transmit the stress response equally through the system, which makes it more resilient to the stressors encountered on a daily basis. I'm going to take a second and I'm going to pause here so I can change the battery on my camera, and I'll be back. Let's change the battery real quick. So I'll give you guys who are with me on the live this webcam view here for a second while I switch this battery out. These batteries only last like 45 minutes, so I always have one charging while the other one's running. I don't think either one had a and it takes more time to charge than it does to be done once you're using it, so it requires constant patience. Come on now, you here? What's going on with you? What's going on with your little battery? Here she goes. Alright. If anyone's joining me still, you guys freaking rock. We're coming back, we're coming back, we're coming back. Whoa there. Hold up. Alright. We're back live. We're back live. Give me a second to just get this tethering software up so that you will be able to see me on my my webcam, on my expensive ass GH5 camera, because the webcam just doesn't look quite as sexy. That focus right, okay. This might require a wee bit of finesse. Let's go check out this number one scene. All right, we're back in the mix. Cool, guys. So let's get back to what we were saying. When postural stresses are pushed too far, the inevitable result is pain. And pain is something we can't argue with. So our posture needs to be prioritized. Because our posture is such an essential expression of our internal attitude and emotions, it is also like a huge element of nonverbal communication. We judge each other in our interpersonal relationships based on the way that we hold ourselves. I'm sure you guys have heard of Jordan Peterson. He wrote a book called 12 Rules to Life recently, and one of his big rules was he emphasized the exceptionally ancient and fundamental relationship between posture and hierarchy by highlighting reoccurring postural patterns all the way down to the social interactions of lobsters, guys. And this is just mind-blowing to think about it. Lobsters, all the way down to lobsters, they derive their confidence from the way they hold themselves. So the alpha lobster has a big chest, and it's the same way that we do it. Either you're slouched over and you're defeated, or you're open and exposed and confident. Like, this is not just a human phenomenon. This goes throughout all of the animal kingdom, right? And while our cognitive layer of experience may be unique to us, this emotional uprising from the way that we hold ourselves is essential all the way down the evolutionary chain. So, this great quote from Jordan Peterson, he says, maybe you're a loser, maybe you're not, but if you are, you don't have to continue to be that. Maybe you just have a bad habit. Maybe you're even just collecting bad habits. Nonetheless, even if you came by your poor posture honestly, even if you were unpopular or bullied at home, it's not necessarily appropriate now. So right now in this moment, by channeling our most valuable resource that we have, which is our awareness, we can stand a little bit taller through our crown. We can engage our expansion of our chest a little bit more. And if you want to learn, the nuances of how to optimize all this, this is what I do for my clients. It's highly movement based, but it's all, oriented towards bringing out our fullest potential. Feel free to reach out to me if you want more information on that. So how do you improve your posture and mood? The key to posture and life is alignment, right? We need to coordinate our parts and pieces into a unity that orients optimally with these forces that form us. And this happens on the physical, emotional, and psychological layer. The most powerful tendency working in opposition to optimal postural alignment is when our habits become unconscious and they imbalance us. It's like, do you tend to lean to one side more often than not? Become aware of that, right? because over time, that continual input builds up a memory in your body, and we need to start to bring awareness in the moment to moment so that we can align optimally and seek to listen to this inner felt sense of our body so that we can be called towards the way that we should be holding ourselves at any point in time. While there's no right answer to that, there are wronger answers than others. So how does our body store emotions? This is going to be really fascinating. Let me switch this slide over. So now we get into this relationship of where physically our archetypical emotional patterns tend to arise from. And I might kind of speed through this fast, guys, because this is a really deep topic and there's a lot more to talk about. And I'm already going on with this, so hopefully someone's getting something out of it. Okay. From the bottom up, from our feet relate to our sense of support, stability, and grounding in an emotional, psychological sense. So physically, as well as emotionally, psychologically, it's all one. Flat feet, for example, can manifest as a difficult time staying still and a nervousness behind our action, whereas clutching feet, where the toes curl in, can manifest as a gripping that relates to an overdeveloped need to hold on and keep things under control. If you have your weight shifted more on your heels, you're more easily pushed over, which might manifest as an exaggerated attitude of determination or control or compensation for feelings of fear and instability. Whereas if you have your weight exaggerated forward on your toes, that can manifest as like a floaty, dreamy quality because you're not as grounded. This is just a quick example of just the way that our physical body forms and manifests into who we are. This is why the body is the foundation. I heard somebody say recently, but what about the spirit? And I'm like, the spirit is beautiful, the spirit is great, but the problem with the spirit is it tends to pull us away from this physical felt sense. Start with it here, guys. That's my mission, that's my motto, that is my way. I'm not saying it's the only way, but it might be the more objective way. So our ankles and knees, moving on up the body, these are joints, right? And whenever we talk about joints, we can think of them as a psychosomatic crossroad, right? So this is where the energetic, emotional forces, they pass and they are mediated, as well as the physical forces, right? Our stress flows through our joints, which is another reason that the joints are often a fail point. And this is why the quality of our joints is what allows us to either go through life graceful and well integrated or spastic and disjointed. You ever heard that? She's just so disjointed. What the hell does that mean? We have these nomenclatures, these sayings that reveal so much innate intuitive wisdom that we get so adapted to we don't even recognize when we say them. So the condition of your joints reveals a great deal about the way an individual is dealing with the flow and motion of their life. And the ankles and knees in particular, they share associations with the feet and grounding and stability, but they also relate to our sense of progression through life. So if you're feeling like I'm just stuck, I can't get where I'm trying to go, that could manifest in the knees and vice versa. Building some stronger knees might help take you to where you want to be. Boom. Let's talk about the legs in general. These are our sense of self-support. So if we have weak legs, we might have a tentative self-image and depend on others for support and confidence. If we have overdeveloped, massive legs, this could relate to a rigid personality and a congested way of being, and you might have a difficulty easily pivoting or shifting or being spontaneous, right? Whereas fat, underdeveloped legs are sluggish and have a difficulty initiating action and following through. And then thin, tight legs tend to be found on go-getters. The energetic flow is intense and vital, yet it comes out in spurts, which can lead to erratic and inconsistent fashion in our motivation and oftentimes clumsiness. So by training your legs, you train your sense of self-support when done correctly. If you over-adapt and need too many particular directions, it may manifest negatively. So you've heard this expression, stand on your own 2 feet. What does that mean? It means to not rely on others. What about he doesn't have a leg to stand on? What does that mean? He has no basis for the things that he's saying or the worldview he's trying to put forward. really think about these taken for granted expressions that we use all the time. All right, let's keep on jamming through this. The pelvis is associated with sexual energy when it's tipped forward, which can often lead to a compression in the back. It's associated, or tipped upward, I should say, which is a flattening of the low back. That's associated with holding our sexual energy in can correspond to rigid, overdeveloped legs. But when it's tipped downwards, you get that nice curvature, that openness of the core. That tends to be a heightened sexual energy. I'm sure you guys know this girl who's just like tilted back and open, and she's just such a slut. Maybe. No? Okay, I'm just saying. Maybe I've seen one or two. Start to pay attention to this stuff. It's super fascinating, guys. You start to see that everybody is a representation of their body. Everybody. It's in our language. Okay, keep jamming. The abdominals. This is our most vulnerable and unprotected area of the body. It contains our most sensitive feelings, emotions, passions. It's our feeling center, right? Literally our center of ourself. It's where our organs are. So it's associated with control, consumption, and metabolic energy. But it's also where we hold most of our emotional, energetic blocks. And the lower back is one of our most common sources of stress and tension and pain. So the back is really fascinating, guys. So from above comes feelings and demands of our responsibility, our duty, our guilt, our burdens, both physically and psychologically. Gravity is pulling downward on us. And our mind, our thinking self, is directing downward from the top down. Whereas our lower body is more concerned with this upward force of supporting ourselves and meeting the demands that are placed upon us, going forward in action, staying upright and tall, standing on your own 2 feet. So where these two energies often converge is in the low back. So tension in these muscles can, often reflect a degree to which an individual overstructures, controls their life, or doesn't let these two mediating forces evenly flow. Sometimes your low back pain is not a physical result, and even when it is a physical result, it can manifest mentally and emotionally. And this back and forth relationship is super fascinating, right? Our diaphragm is what goes around the abdominals, right? And when it's tight and constricted, it limits our feelings and our breathing. We literally can't take a full breath. So it's like a lid that we put on top of our emotions. And when it's blocked, it reduces sensation. So we feel less. We feel less of the sorrow, less of the good, but also less of the bad, less of the joy, but also less of the sadness. And this shallow breathing can tend to contribute to anxiety over time. And as we rise up through the chest, this is where our feelings get focused and amplified and translate. So it comes up from that base core, and then our emotions are processed and they flow upward as we relate them through our hands, our arms, our mouth. Emotions, thoughts, expressions, they mix and swirl in the chest, continually changing form and directions as we proceed from creation to expression. How fascinating is that? The chest, our heart, it's responsible for the harmonious integration of our varied aspects. It relates to how we show ourselves through the world. We share our heart with the world. Keep your heart open, right? And specifically the heart, it's associated with experiences of affection, love. Why is that we have that reoccurring thing? Because it actually comes from this swirling of emotions being directed into interpersonal connection. So when we have tension in the heart, it indicates a state of chronic self-protection. We're armoring this region against hurt or attack, but that locks away our feelings of warmth and nourishment. Long-held fears and pockets of sadness can get released and just magically improve our breathing patterns. We start to smile more. We feel lighter when we release this tension that we hold at our heart. It's heartwarming to behold, right? And as these emotions travel through the heart, the raw parts get dressed up and prepare themselves to be presented to the world. It's in the chest that emotions become amplified by the force and drive of the lungs, animated with the passion and liveliness of the heart, and encouraged outward by the expressive elements of our arms and our face. Most of our feelings also get stuck here when they're too tender. Our soft emotions of sadness, sorrow, longing, pity, depression, wanting, heartbreak, they don't come up all the way through the heart. So when the chest is contracted, you might have difficulty building and sustaining an energetic charge for passion and for self-assertion. Your actions become more passive, and you tend to be motivated by a chronic sense of lack of confidence. Right? Chest expansion can encourage an overcharge of energy and excitement. Expanding the chest pumps up aggressiveness, and this is why those big chest guys tend to be more overblown in their attitude and might have a loss of contact with the more tender parts of themselves. When your chest is expanded, you feel tough, strong, and powerful. But it can be hard to receive, right? So they say don't let your front down. And this is another big aspect that I work with clients, is like learning how to create expansion in the upper torso of our body. There is a way to do this. And through the practice of doing this, I have seen lives change. So these are the keys and codes that kind of go beyond a typical, physical trainer experience. It's really movement therapy to a degree, and movement and optimization holistically through movement. Again, if you have any questions on the specifics of how to do this, any part of it, reach out to me. I'm here to support, guys. That's why I'm taking all the time to do this shit. All right, let's keep going. So, they say take it on the chest. You've heard that expression before. Or say it with your chest. Think about, where do these expressions come from? All right, moving on. We got our shoulders, we got our arms, which are associated with expressing ourself, our character. The shoulders are connected to the chest, so when our shoulders are rounded, this is like the weight of our burden really weighing heavy on us. When they're high, it's like there's some fear and excitement, and when our shoulders are squared, we have a sense of power and self-assuredness, this ability to shoulder whatever burden comes in. It's really fascinating because our mind holds the mental model, which is something we'll talk about soon, and everything from the head and below tends to be more primal, which is why the burden of our culture and our cognitive world tends to show up on our shoulders, because that's where that mental energy starts to meet that physical energy. So much I could say about that, right? And if you're over retracted in the shoulders, maybe you're holding back, you're not expressing your temper and anger, or you want to strike out, right? Because we'll get a little bit more geeked on it for a second. Our serratus muscle, which is what allows for our punching, is what pulls our shoulder up and forward. So when that's constantly suppressed, it causes a contraction and retraction in the back of the scap. So our arms and our hands, they're used for communication, they're used for interaction, they're used for function. They are the way that we engage and create and shape the world. So when you have weak arms, you might have a lack of ability to reach out and take hold of your life. Reach out and take hold of your life. Where have you heard that before? What does that really mean? If you have really overdeveloped arms, you might have a lack of grace or sensitivity in your expression and the way that you contact the world. Rigid arms reflect a grasping, a clawing, a clutching quality, whereas fat arms are obviously sluggish and have a hard time being precise or initiating action. So these are just different ways that our body shows up as energy and emotion. And next up, we got our neck, our throat, and our jaw, which of course is our vocal expression and our self-reflection, our development of our own self-image. The throat holds on to our fears of expression too. So if we feel blocks here, it's something that we've held back from saying. Whereas our neck tends to hold tension and stiffness when we're tired or we're just stressed. Emotions flow from the belly to the chest, and they enter the neck to get further translated from feelings into thoughts and words, from sounds to sounds and concepts, right? The chest expands and amplifies, the neck refines. I find that fascinating. And lastly, our face and our head, right? This part of us, our mental body. You ever heard of to lose face? He lost face. What does that mean? Give me a second to think about that. It relates to a sense of shame. Your face is a mask that you present to the world, and it reveals a lot about your inner feelings. So we don't just shape our face to the way that we feel, we also shape our face to fit how we pretend to feel or how we think others want us to feel. Obviously, our ears enable hearing and balance. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul. But one that I find most fascinating is the forehead. And this was one of my first real like peak body awareness moments, which is our forehead and our brow relates to our rationality and our focus. So oftentimes it's easily overstressed when this brow is nice and clenched. You can see I have a little stress mark there. We are very focused, but we are also very in our mental self. By simply relaxing the forehead and just continuing to relax the forehead and relaxing it more and more and more, we can start to come out of our head and back into our body. So much more I could say about that. Okay, we're getting into it here, guys. It's really happening. I'll skip through this taxonomy of attention, right, into how to channel energy. So for this portion, I want to play a movie for you. And I just got to find it on my computer here really quick, which talks about energy as a spectrum. So the first thing we discussed, right, was when it came to the energetic, was that it's a neutral thing, right? And the polarity is created by our expectation of outcome. While it's neutral, it has, and because it's a frequency, it has a frequency to it, a lower and a higher frequency. And that higher frequency is associated with being quicker to action, being harder to maintain. And all of this I explain really well in this video here. So let me just find this video. I'll drag it over to the other screen so you guys can see. I think it's this one right here. Let's see if this is the one. Leveraging energy. Okay, hold on. Let me bring this over. I'm gonna bring this into the mix here really quick so you guys can watch along with me. And hopefully we will be able to hear the audio, because I'm not hearing the audio now, but the audio should come through. It's going to be this one right here. Okay. Bring that into the mix. God, Mr. Producer. All right, I'm going to put that right there, and I'm just going to bring that one down so I'm on top. All right, let's see if we can get some volume out of this guy. Hearing the... Okay, so I guess I'm going to just talk over this visual for you as we talk about how emotional management is so necessary for hitting your goals and your targets. This does have a voiceover on top of it, but I don't know why it's not playing right now. So how do we leverage our dissatisfaction? This is a really important skill that I find like the majority of the world doesn't fully utilize to the maximum of their capacity. This is one of the things that really distinguishes people who win from people who don't. So if we look at the characteristics of dissatisfied energy, for example, dissatisfied energy tends to be more combustible, it's quicker to action, and it's less sustainable. So it might burn you out, but it's harder to stay there. This is high frequency energy. So the lowest frequency would be like a depression. Depression is easy to stay in for a long time. It doesn't drive action so much, but depression and contentment are actually the same frequency. The difference is expectation of outcome. So if you are in this low frequency state, but you feel like it's all going to work out, then you're content. If you're in this low frequency state, but you feel like, oh my God, I'm not getting anywhere, that is where depression comes in. So really contentment and depression are the exact same energy. And the only difference is, again, that story that we put on top of it. Let's keep going from here. And at the same time, on the higher end of the spectrum, we have anger or inspiration. Anger and inspiration are both, quick, they're hard to hold, they make you want to move. And the difference between if you're angry and if you're inspired, again, is that expectation of outcome. So I love this quote, man. This is from The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And, oh, that went really quick. Something is going on. This is all choppy. So you take your deepest depression, you take your sadness, your angst, and then you transform it into anger. So those low frequency energies you start to bring up into a higher frequency energy, and then you turn that higher frequency energy into action. And that is the body's secret of internal alchemy. This video is really going all over the place. I don't know why, but that is one of my all-time favorite quotes. This is why we box, to relieve stress. Right? So if we have appreciation on one side, we got gratitude at the top, rising up, contentment, and then inspiration. So you see how there's a spectrum of positive outcome frequencies. So like even if you think like it's all gonna work out great, the lowest end of that is just being content. As it starts to move up, you get a little bit more grateful. And then the highest, closest to action is inspiration. I hope this is making sense to you guys, because this is really like such a crucial key to know that no matter what energy you feel, whether it's you think of it as positive or negative, it can all be used as fuel. And I think this ability to turn our emotional and our emotional states into fuel towards actionability. I hate when I say I'm starting to catch myself. I was doing pretty good there. But this is one of the big differences that determine whether people end up getting to where they want to go or not. It's like you can feel heartbreak, use it. You can feel depressed, use it. Don't let it keep you stuck. Move forward into action. It doesn't matter if you always feel good. The always feel good is just a story that you're layering on top, right? And sometimes it's bad to have that positive story because, you might think that you're content when you're really depressed. But the only difference is the way that you're viewing it. So what matters most? Embodying your potential, not being happy. We want to achieve what we are destined for. That's a central key tenet to everything we're talking about here. And then lastly, mastering our mind. So it's important to understand about the mind is the way that it's structured. And again, I'm breaking it down into its simplest layers because we could get far more complicated. Neuroscience understands the brain in terms of defined networks, which are collections of brain regions that show functional connectivity. And each of these defined networks represents a distinct mode of cognitive function. So 3 basic categorizations, well 2, and then an interpretation between. We have the default mode network and the central executive network. These are what scientists term them, but really it's the default mode network is the part of our brain that creates our representation of reality, whereas the central executive is the part of our brain that is task-oriented and focuses on our awareness of what we need to be doing. And then underneath, intermediating both of those, is this attentional filter, which is constantly telling us like where we need to go, what we need to be paying attention to. For example, if you're driving a car, you could be very much in your default mode network, not paying a lot of attention, and then something you come to the road, your attentional filter will activate, and all of a sudden, now you're very focused on the task of driving all of a sudden again. So understanding that these are two distinct ways that the brain works and how they mediate and relate to each other is central to how we orient and direct our awareness over time. And we could talk about these a lot more, but I think what's really interesting is understanding the nature of how our attentional filter works. So this is how manifestation works, right? This is why when you start to say, I'm focusing on this, you start to see it more in the world. Our attentional filter prioritizes threats or things that we decide are important. It sees the world through the lens of category, metaphor, and goals, which is like the under-recognized part of this. I love this Aldous Huxley quote. He says, "The function of the brain and the nervous system is to protect us from being overwhelmed and confused by a mass of largely useless and irrelevant knowledge, by shutting down or shutting out most of what we would otherwise perceive or remember at any moment, and leaving only a small section in our awareness of what is practically useful." This matters because if we don't focus on what is useful, we become overwhelmed with all the sensations. We see, we hear, we feel so much more than we actually need to be aware of. So how do we choose what to be aware of? We don't want to waste our valuable neural processing capacity just hyper focusing on every blade of grass, because awareness is a limited resource, and it's the most precious limited resource, right? So how do we do this? We start to discern things in terms of categories. So for example, we group like-minded objects together. If you have, and this is why we talk about, seeing the forest and not the trees. Let's say you have a bowl of rice, right? We see that, our brain understands that as an aggregated thing. It's a bowl of rice. We don't, because everything in there is functionally interchangeable. Each of the rices are the same thing to our immediate use. So we categorize them in the same for cognitive economy, right? But let's say you're eating that rice and you notice there's a bug in it. All of a sudden your attentional filter shifts and this is no longer the same thing. So you start to see each individual grain of rice as something that's separate. And this scales upwards, right? So we can scale all the way down into more and more individual parts and pieces, or we scale upwards just for functional use. So if we categorize something as a threat or stress, we immediately switch into focusing on it. And this is what I was talking about with that driving thing. And the metaphors that we choose to look at life through are another big part and piece of how our attentional filter frames everything that we're interpreting. And I love this example that Tony Robbins gives. He's talking about his team and how, one metaphor he uses is like thinking of his team as a family. And that could be a very functional metaphor at times, but say you have a member of your team that's not working out and you need to fire them. You can't fire your family. So now he applies the metaphor of my team is a vehicle. It's a vehicle for sharing my message with the world. So when a vehicle has one part that's missing, you need to take that part out and interchange that part. So now we have the same situation looked at under two different metaphors. And we need a flexibility in our metaphors. So sometimes life is a game. Sometimes life is a dance. Sometimes life is war. But if we're stuck in only one frame, it's extremely limiting. So a big key, this understanding is useful, is in the artful use of the metaphors that we choose to look at our reality through. Whew, that was a lot of stuff, guys. And then we get to crafting spells, which is, again, this intentional use of our internal languaging structure so that we can get the desired result that we want. And this comes up in a lot of ways. I'm sure you've heard of neuro-linguistic programming. You might have also heard of vocabulary. The things that are important to recognize, right? There's certain ways of forming our language that serve us and certain ways that don't. The ways that don't serve us are when we talk in very soft ways, passive ways. You say, I might want to, but maybe I will see if there's lots of uncertainty there, and there's also a disassociative factor. Why are there so many I's? It should be I will, right? That is an empowering spell. That is empowering language that will take you where you want to go. We also tend to project and give our power to other people with our language. So he made me feel this way. They made me do this, right? This is another bad spell that we're crafting on ourselves. We also talk in terms of negatives, and this is one of the big things to know about our brain. Our mind does not understand negatives. So if I tell you, don't think of a pink elephant, you just thought of a pink elephant whether you wanted to or not. You can't help it. So if I frame my internal language in terms of what I don't want, I'm going to get a whole lot of what I don't want. I don't want to be sad. Your brain just hears, sad, be sad. You say, I want to be happy. Now you start to orient your spells in a direction that actually serves you. And there's a lot more we could talk about this. This will be going into my book as well. If you're interested, again, learning any more about any of this stuff, feel free to reach out, and I'm here as a source of support. I hope this was useful. I hope this provided you keys to better understanding. I'm sure a lot of this is stuff some of you may have heard before. So let's get a discussion going. Let's talk more about this. Let's continue to refine through connection and collaboration so that we can all collectively, reach our fullest potential, because we have our potential as an individual, but that isn't even close to touching our potential as a unified collection, right? Just like every cell in your body is not much when it's by itself, but when every cell, every finger, every hand, every arm, every piece and part comes together to form you, it creates a miracle. And in that same way, when we collaborate and connect, we can create something so much bigger than ourselves. So our potential is so much greater than what our individual can ever touch or hope. And I say all that just to say, like, drop a comment, engage, share it, ask questions, challenge me, and let's grow together. Hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. A lot of this was taken from a book that I am working on currently, so more on that coming soon. Writing books is a challenge, and you can probably see why. There's so much information going into this right now. It's like I'm really trying to distill the most useful keys from just countless perspectives. But I'm about to get to work on the book soon, so I'll end this recording, guys. As always, you know where to find me, you know where to reach out to me. Let's stay connected. I need a good saying. I need like a closing speech. Quit holding yourself back, motherfuckers. Peace.